Dominic, I was going to say the last time you and I went on the podcast together was in Windsor for the state visit, but you've just reminded me another whole world event in between them.
Yeah, there was the UN General Assembly in New York, Mark, and since that does seem an age away, doesn't it? An age ago, because since then everything's changed in terms of the Middle East, and you've had to get on a plane at very short notice and head to Sharm el Sheikh, and I've had to get up to Jerusalem because peace, it seems, might be breaking out at least over Gaza.
Yeah, it is indicative of the world we live in. Everything moves so unbelievably quickly. I'm Mark Stone in Sharm el Sheikh in the Sinai Desert in Egypt.
And I'm Dominic Waghorn in Jerusalem, Israel. And the podcast today, we are going to digest an extraordinary 72 hours in the Middle East.
Yes, as we record, the American president is in the air on his way to Sharm el Sheikh. The British Prime Minister has just landed here, and at least 20 world leaders are on their way, along with many, many more foreign ministers, all here for an event that was only announced a couple of days ago.
I think we're all suffering from a kind of head-spinning sense of whiplash, aren't we, Mark? You're now in sunny Sharm el Sheikh, and I guess that's not the easiest place to get to from Washington.
It actually really isn't. It took a very long time. And then when I got here, there were all sorts of challenges. I'll be honest, I don't think it's a secret. I don't think the Egyptians will be offended if I was to say that Egypt is not the easiest place for journalists to work. There are restrictions. They have laws. They have, accreditation that is needed. And it's been a bit of a headache. Even trying to get the internet to work for this podcast was a bit of a challenge, but we've got there. We are here. I have the accreditations in my hand, and we're a few hours away now from this extraordinary summit. And it genuinely is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, we'll get into what's happened over the course of the past couple of days in a moment, but looking ahead, and I guess it's worth saying that by the time you listen to this, some of what we're going to be discussing might already have happened. But it's a pretty extraordinary day ahead, right, Dom?
Yeah, you're right, Mark. Events are moving very quickly. And so, what we say now might be superseded by events. But I think the fundamentals remain the same, which is that there's been an amazing breakthrough diplomatically. Donald Trump has managed to galvanize progress by putting a huge amount of pressure on the Israelis, but also getting his allies in the region to put a huge amount of pressure on Hamas to get them to agree to a ceasefire and a hostage and prisoner exchange deal. And I think the question for me really is it going to become more than that? We're now going to see the end to this war finally, this terrible war that's gone on for 2 years and killed tens of thousands of people. Is it going to go back to what it was before October the 7th, or actually is there a chance, a possibility to build on this now that everybody's so engaged and possibly bring about something that's going to be even more lasting for the region and possibly lay the seeds for a broader peace?
Right. And that second point that you make about the future, laying the seeds for what might come next, that is what the meeting, on the face of it at least, that's what the meeting here where I am in Sharm el Sheikh will be about, because that is a gathering, as I say, of at least 20 world leaders, many, many foreign ministers as well. And I think the plan, beyond Donald Trump enjoying the moment, framing it as his peace deal. He did speak briefly to reporters just before boarding his plane, Air Force One, just outside Washington late last night. And listen to this, because I think he sounds incredibly upbeat.
I see a lot of my friends. This is going to be a good one. So this is going to be a very special time, and I guess if you read your own papers and your own networks, everybody's very excited about this moment in time. So I'll see you on the plane. I think you're traveling with us, but this is a very special event. They had 500,000 people yesterday and today in Israel, and also the Muslim and Arab countries are all cheering. Everybody's cheering at one time. That's never happened before. Usually if you have one cheering, the other isn't. The other is the opposite. This is the first time everybody is amazed and they're thrilled, and it's an honor to be involved, and we're going to have an amazing time, and it's going to be something that's never happened before. So I'll see you on the plane, and we're going to have a good time. Okay, Peter? Nice to see you. Thank you, everybody. See you in a little while.
Beyond that, I think the attempt is to bring all these countries together and work out what next? How do you get stage one of this peace plan to stage 2, 3, and 4? One is in a sense the least difficult. It's still been incredibly hard, but it's the least difficult. Getting it beyond stage one is going to be very hard indeed. But Dom, before we get on to what's going to happen here in Sharm el Sheikh over the day ahead, there is, there's kind of a month of news happening in one day. So all the focus is going to be on Israel, where you are first. Talk us through the day.
Yeah, there really is. I mean, what's going to be happening with you is actually happening on the same day as some momentous events happening here in Israel. And it's the last day of the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, when for a week Israelis build makeshift structures in the gardens and on their roofs, commemorating the structures that Jews built when they were lost for 40 years in the Sinai desert after the exodus from bondage in Egypt. And fittingly, tomorrow, the last day of that holiday, the last of those held in captivity in the tunnels in Gaza are coming home as the Sinai desert and Sharm el Sheikh become the centre of the diplomatic world. And it's worth pointing out, Mark, also that the day after Sukkot is Shemini Atzeret, which is another Jewish holiday, and it was on Shemini Atzeret, which fell on October the 7th, when these terrible attacks happened. So it's, I think, was with extraordinary timing, really, that we're seeing the release of these hostages. And they're going to be coming home, we expect, in the early hours. We're not entirely sure when, sometime between dawn and maybe 8 or 9.
Dom, on the hostage release, we do have a little bit more information now from Israeli sources who have explained how it's going to work, how the hostages will be returned at probably around 8 a.m. Israeli time, with families arriving at the Reim military base in the south of the country. There's a convoy that will collect the hostages from the Red Cross representatives, transfer them to their families at that military base. They will then be flown from there to hospitals. Some of them, according to the Red Cross, who are already on the ground in Gaza and who have seen them, some of the hostages, as you might expect, are not in a good condition, are described to be in a serious condition. So it's going to be a really, really difficult day for many people.
And then Donald Trump's going to be arriving here. He was, I think, slightly delayed by weather taking off, so possibly a bit later, but expected here at sort of 9:30. He's going to meet some of the relatives of the hostages in the Knesset here in Jerusalem, the Israeli parliament. And then he's going to address the Knesset. He'll have meetings with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And then he's out of here. He's flying here at sort of lunchtime, heading your way for what is going to be potentially pretty momentous diplomacy as well. And then while that's going on, at a time we're not quite sure about, the Palestinians who've been held, 1,700 of them who've been held by the Israelis, taken during this war, but also 250 Palestinian prisoners who've been held in Israeli jails for a lot longer than that, many of them with blood on their hands, are going to be released as part of this exchange. So 20 Israeli living hostages being released, 28, the bodies of 28 dead hostages. That is all the hostages that Hamas have in their captivity being released by Hamas, and in return for that, all these Palestinian prisoners as well. Two very different homecomings. The Israelis are going to be obviously welcome. They're going to be rapturous scenes. It's going to be an extraordinary day, I think, for the Israelis. The end of a 2-year ordeal that has really traumatized a nation. Palestinians are going back to their families, and they are going to be banned from celebrating by the Israeli authorities, banned from giving any press interviews. The Israelis are going to great lengths to make sure that not much is going to be made of their return, because obviously their release is hugely controversial here.
Yeah, Dom, it's going to be there are going to be some extraordinary scenes, both in certainly in Gaza, I imagine in the West Bank, but also in Israel as well. Very, very different feel to all of them.
Yeah, and I think, you and I have lived here, Mark, and I think that people who don't quite get how. I mean, obviously we've watched the hostages' families being interviewed for 2 years. We've obviously been really struck, all of us, by their extraordinary courage and the terrible suffering and anguish they've gone through, and some of them are amazing eloquence of talking about and finding the courage to do so. But we have to also add, I think, that in the Jewish psyche and that sort of Israeli psyche, it's even more traumatic what they've been through, because of this idea that that the principle that no one is left behind is really sacred in, I guess, sort of Jewish psychology. And so the loss and the absence of these hostages has traumatized an entire nation. And so I think the sense of catharsis that we're all getting a sense of, we're building up to, is going to be enormous tomorrow. We've seen that to a less extent, I suppose, with the release of other hostage groups over the last months and so. But I think tomorrow is going to be an extraordinary day. And it's also being sort of added to by the fact that Donald Trump is coming, a man who people are hugely grateful for because he has finally broken the logjam in Middle Eastern diplomacy and made this happen.
He's a man who is said to be more popular in Israel, significantly more popular than the Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yes, and that became abundantly clear when his special envoy, Stephen Witkoff, addressed crowds in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv.
I only wish the president was here. He would love this.
And he started talking about Netanyahu, and there were boos and cheers, and he tried to get beyond that, and they carried on happening. Every time he said the Prime Minister's name, he was jeered.
To Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Oh.
And I think that gives a sense of the political bind that Netanyahu is in. He gave a speech this evening in a video release where he was fairly triumphalist about what's happening, but also the successes of the last 2 years. And he talked about the road ahead. It was almost a sense really of him beginning his campaign to try and rehabilitate himself politically. But he has a huge challenge doing so. Many of the hostage families blame him for this war going on as long as it has. Many of them believe, and their supporters believe, that he prolonged the war unnecessarily and the suffering of their relatives and the country, I guess, for his own political survival. There is a reckoning waiting for Benjamin Netanyahu, but obviously that's for a time in the future.
Dom, do you think there is any prospect of President Trump meeting any of the released hostages if that happens in time?
I think that's unlikely, and I think so. We've been to a hospital, one of the hospitals who are going to be releasing the hostages, and you get a real clear sense then of obviously what state they're going to be in. And it was a really emotional, very moving and inspiring visit, because these people have dedicated their lives for the last 2 years. They've put a ward aside for 2 years. They've had staff on standby because of the possibility of hostages coming out at any stage. And they have basically completely reinvented the whole way captivity medicine, as they call it, works. And central to that is giving these hostages the privacy of their own rooms, allowing them to sort of re-emerge back to normality at their own speed. And some of the stories, the anecdotes they told us about were quite revealing. One of them was that, this one of the nurses said that it's not so much difficulty to go to sleep, at least for one hostage. It was actually the difficulty he had waking up, because whenever he woke up, he just thought he couldn't believe he was out of Gaza. He couldn't believe he was out of the tunnels, and he kept believing he was in a dream within a dream. And in a sense, that seemed to carry on tormenting him. So there were ways they had to deal with that. Another hostage she took to the fridge just to give him a yogurt, and as she opened the door, she noticed that he was basically sort of rooted to the spot. He couldn't respond. And she said, "Are you okay?" And he just sort of paused and said, I'm sorry, I can't get used to the colours I'm seeing. A whole range of different coloured yogurt pots, because he said, I'm just used to black and white and brown in the tunnels. And she had to give him a moment and help him out of that. They're just small details, but a real sense of, this terrible ordeal they've been through affects everybody very differently and requires just very different treatment. Each one of them's different, and they have to be given the kind of the space and the speed of recovery that they require. But also, it's a long, long road to recovery. They're going to need help for a long time to come. The idea of him having a photo opportunity with these hostages in these hospitals, I would say, is unlikely, but he is likely to meet the families and relatives of some of them, we think, in the Knesset in Jerusalem.
And then he will board Air Force One again and fly south from Jerusalem, or from Ben Gurion Airport, just outside Tel Aviv, south down here to the Sinai Peninsula, to Sharm el Sheikh, where he'll be joined, as we were saying, by many other world leaders for an event that's taking place in the unusually named Lamborghini Convention Center here in here in Sharm el Sheikh. Which is just up the road from the hotel I'm in. I spoke to an Egyptian official a couple of days ago who sounded like he was completely run off his feet. He said, "I really can't talk at the moment. We are totally overwhelmed," was the phrase that he used. Because the Egyptians are, on the face of it, hosting this, but actually it is it is an American event. There was the invitation that has been going out to world leaders was leaked by Barak Ravid from Axios, an incredibly well sourced Israeli journalist. And it reads kind of like a sort of wedding invitation. It says the President of the United States invites the chief of state or head of government to attend a signing ceremony of a Middle East peace plan. Monday, 13th of October, 2025, 2:30 to 4:25. So it's quite long. And then it says underneath, kindly respond to Sharm Middle East Peace Event at state.gov. I mean, they've sort of created an email address for it. And then it says, your head of state is invited to attend this meeting with just one additional delegation member due to limited space, et cetera, et cetera. So you really get the sense just from that invitation that this has all been cooked up very, very quickly. I, by chance, sat next to a quite a senior American diplomat on the flight over here. She wasn't particularly chatty, but I did get the sense from her. We did chat a bit, and I got the sense from her that clearly all of this has been cooked up very quickly. But she's a political appointee. She's a Trump fan, and she was incredibly excited at the just how quickly they've got this together and the prospects for peace ahead.
Which is an extraordinary prelude to an extraordinary event. But I think the question for me, Mark, is it going to be a kind of repeat, but even more glorified repeat of the kind of sycophancy that we saw in the wake of the Alaska summit when European leaders went to Washington, and you reported from outside the White House, but they spent most of the time saying what an amazing leader Donald Trump was and praising him, trying to steer things in the right direction. We potentially could have, and I don't see how we avoid this actually, 20 leaders, one after the other, saying what an amazing peacemaker he is, what an amazing achievement it is that he's engineered this peace. I mean, if they're calling it a peace deal, it's not really a peace deal. It's so far, it's a hostage and prisoner exchange agreement. I'm not sure what there is there to sign. I don't know if you have. But also the other question is, the key thing now is what happens next. Can they put in place a security apparatus in Gaza and a government that means that Hamas cannot come back and fill the vacuum? That needs diplomacy, and you'd hope that would happen in Sharm, or at least beginning tomorrow. The danger for me is it's just a kind of made-for-TV opportunity for Trump to bask in the glory of his diplomacy, but actually doesn't really achieve much in terms of diplomacy.
Yeah, so a few things there. I think you're right. I think it will be a photo op. I think there will be a level of sycophancy of the type that we have seen before. But I think also the world leaders who are coming will be aware that they need to do more than that. They are going to praise Donald Trump. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But if you remember what they did in that summit in Washington after Alaska, they all came with the European leaders came with a slightly different message. They didn't really repeat it. Yes, they all repeated the praise for Trump, but then beyond that, they had a different point to make, each of them. And I think they will probably repeat that that sort of tactic today, where they'll all want to look beyond what you have rightly said is just a ceasefire. I mean, it's a massive moment, but we mustn't get ahead of ourselves. It's only phase one. And the really hard part comes afterwards, and I think that's the focus of this summit. It's to try and look beyond tomorrow to what comes next. And on that point, and you ask, and I asked this morning as well, what are they actually going to sign? Well, in the last hour, I have confirmed from well-placed sources that the Palestinian president Mahmoud Abbas is coming. As of this morning, he hadn't confirmed. He is coming along with his deputy Hussein al Sheikh, who incidentally met today, Sunday, with Tony Blair in Jordan. Tony Blair, for those people who haven't been following, is going to play a key role in the post-Gaza governance. And it's significant that he sat down today with the number two of the Palestinian Authority. Remember, the Palestinian Authority is distinct from Hamas, a completely distinct organization that is desperate to have a key role in the day after plans for Gaza. And Hussein al-Sheikh posted a photograph of him with Tony Blair. And I'll read you what he said with it, because I think it's important and actually contradicts what Hamas told Yalda just yesterday. He said, Hussein al-Sheikh speaking for the Palestinian Authority, said, "We have confirmed our readiness to work with President Trump, Mr. Blair, and the partners to consolidate the ceasefire, entry of aid, the release of hostages and prisoners, and start with the recovery and reconstruction." Then it goes on to say, he then underlines the importance of pursuing the two-state solution. So I think that meeting with Blair was important. Al Sheikh and Mahmoud Abbas will both be here in Sharm el Sheikh as well. What we haven't heard, Dom, and I don't know if you've heard anything about this, is whether anyone from the Israeli government will be here. But look, Dom, I do think it is worth underlining the fact that the deal isn't done until it's done. They may well have agreed in Sharm el Sheikh last week to this ceasefire, to the hostage release, to the prisoner release. The two sides did come together last week, but it's not done until the moment. And I think that's why this day ahead is going to be very, very tense. And there are suggestions, just as we were going to record, that Hamas, one of the Hamas leaders, and don't forget, there are a few of them, they don't all always align. One of them seemed to be suggesting that Israel was not abiding by its side of the bargain. So there's jeopardy here. And until we get to the end of the day, with everything going to plan, there will be an awful lot of very anxious people, politicians, and of course, families.
No, we haven't heard. No, and that's the big question. You know, if Mahmoud Abbas is going, he seems to be going, as you say, the Israelis expect to be going as well. And on the face of it, so far as we know, they're not going. And to pick up what you're saying about Tony Blair, as you say, Hamas have said to Yalda earlier in the week that's out of the question. I think for many Arabs, it's completely out of the question. The idea that the British could be coming back in any shape or form to have some kind of governing role in the form of Tony Blair in Gaza is unacceptable, particularly a man who is blamed by many, many Arabs for his part in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis because of his support of Britain's involvement in the Iraq War. But you know, that's one of the great imponderables, and there's so many as part of this as we look at this deal, if we can call it a deal. And I think, you know, the key question is going to be, and we don't really know enough because we still can't get into Gaza, and we've not been able to get into Gaza for 2 years. We don't know how weakened Hamas is. It's obviously massively weakened in a military sense, but it's standing by the fact that this deal does allow it to carry on as an organisation. And so far as we know, it's the only organisation that is able to try and win back the hearts and minds, organised enough to win back the hearts and minds of Gazans. And the PA, you know, Mahmoud Abbas's organisation, doesn't have any power in Gaza. It hasn't since it was thrown out of there in 2007. So what is required by these world leaders is to put in place very quickly a security force, and a number of countries have offered their troops from France to all the way to Indonesia, but there's no sign of that yet being put together. But it has to get there very quickly, and it start, you know, bringing about law and order and avoiding any chaos there. But also, this transition authority has got to form fairly quickly. So it's what's going to happen in Sharm, but also what happens after that. And I think, as you say, you know, we're going to see a lot of spectacle tomorrow, but there is a real sense of opportunity. There's a lot of diplomacy going on in the background. There's a real sense that we have an American president now who is fully engaged, who is prepared to put the kind of pressure that's needed on Israel, but also he's got other regional actors to do what's required to put pressure on Palestinians. It's an opportunity, but it's potentially quite a narrow moment of opportunity. And you hope that, you know, all these leaders gathering in Sharm are going to seize that moment and make this potential actually last.
Yeah, so quite a few people have asked me today, do I think that Donald Trump is going to lose interest after tomorrow? I mean, we know he has a short attention span. In fact, one Palestinian source I was speaking to a couple of days ago said he has the attention span of a goldfish. So there is a concern there that he will lose interest, move on to something else. I'm not convinced he will. I think he's attached himself to this so firmly now. And if you add to that the whole sort of Nobel Peace Prize next year and all of that, I think he will stay the course. He also, of course, wants to further the Abraham Accords, which was a key foreign policy achievement, maybe the key foreign policy achievement in his first term. He's not going to be able to do that unless he can keep this on track. And that brings me back to Tony Blair. I don't know if you caught what Baroness Ashton, Cathy Ashton, said to Trevor Phillips on Sky this morning. Did you see?
I didn't see it, Mark, no.
So she said that her view is that the reason she accepts that Tony Blair is not necessarily the most popular character across the Arab world, but her view and I think she's she's a pretty well placed person to believe this. Her view that, the reason she says Blair is involved is because he's close to Trump, bizarrely, but he is. Trump respects him. Witkoff really respects Tony Blair, and also, incidentally, is close to Jonathan Powell, who is currently the national security advisor in the UK and was working with Tony Blair on the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. Jonathan Powell knows all about how to reconcile different parties. But Blair, according to Cathy Ashton, is there to make sure that Donald Trump stays the course. So he's well connected, if not liked, around the Arab world. He does know a lot of movers and shakers, certainly in the Gulf. He's close to Trump, and he is in a good position to make sure that Trump doesn't lose interest. I thought that was an interesting observation.
Yeah, and he was Middle East envoy, obviously, for all those years. He understands what is required to build a Palestinian state, and he can sort of reopen those files and re-engage with all those Palestinians in the West Bank and in Ramallah and try and make that make it happen. But I suppose the key challenge is what happens to Hamas. I think the danger is not that Hamas retreats into the shadows and comes back to fight anytime soon, but the danger is that it remains a powerful or dominant force in Gaza, that it bides its time, and then it is a threat again. And the real danger is that Israel then goes back to having to cut it down to size. We go back to where we were before October the 7th. And there is the opportunity here now because so much has changed in 2 years, in so many different ways in this region. There is the chance of a new start, but that has to be seized, and that will require a huge amount of diplomatic input. It will require, as you say, Donald Trump to stay engaged. And I think you're right. I think the Abraham Accords are one of the things he's most proud of. And if this doesn't go in the right direction, they could still unravel. So that's kind of binding him in, I think, to this process. And there are a whole number of people, from Tony Blair to many others, who really want this to happen. And they are now doing what I think, since October the 7th, people have hoped for, which is that it was such a terrible event, such an awful day of atrocities, and has led to so much suffering and carnage and deaths, that there is an opportunity to now step back from that, and step back from the abyss, and create a new future. But it's going to take a huge amount of political will and a huge amount of effort. And it's the Middle East, and so many things could go wrong.
You mentioned peacekeeping forces. That there's been a bit of discussion about that, but it does seem very likely that there will be some sort of probably a UN force. It'll be under the auspices of the UN. It will require a UN resolution. They'll be wearing blue berets on the ground in Gaza. But that will be a highly dangerous operation. I think most Western countries will not want to get involved necessarily in that. I remember talking to a diplomat from a Gulf Arab country about 6 months ago, and I said then, "Do you think will the Gulf Arabs, will Muslim majority countries put forward peacekeepers?" And he said, "No, I don't think we will." That seems to have changed. They now do seem to be on board with that. And Egypt today has said that it's expressed readiness to participate in security arrangements in the Gaza Strip with within a UN framework. That's one to watch, and I think that's something that will be discussed at the beginning of a conversation about that will be discussed in Sharm over the day ahead.
Yeah, I think you're right. And they had said they'd only get involved if there's a UN resolution. That will take time to put together. And as I say, time is absolutely of the essence here. There's an urgent need to put in a force that is credible, that is effective, and doesn't it's not just Hamas, it's the Dogmouche clan, it's all the other criminal gangs in Gaza who are going to capitalise now on the fact that the Israelis have pulled back and make the most of building their own fiefdoms. And then there has to be some kind of authority that is credible as well and effective and can oversee the aid and the rebuilding of Gaza. Because you've got to win back and the hearts and minds of Gazans and make them believe that there is going to be an alternative to the kind of oppressive Islamist rule they have suffered under since 2007. If they don't see a credible alternative to that, then Hamas will be able to, in the shadows, still prevail and remain a dominant force. And Israel's not going to tolerate that, and then we go back to exactly where we were before.
I'm going to be accused of Trump derangement syndrome now, but there's another way of looking at all this, isn't there? Which is, everyone is giving Donald Trump huge credit for having got this one over the line. But that kind of, I mean, I guess two things could be true at the same time. Yes, he has got it over the line, and his unorthodox methods and using people like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who are outside of the State Department sort of orbit. They've been doing their negotiation from their mansions in Florida. They're real estate guys, they're deal makers. He's doing all that on purpose, and it has had a success. But it's also the case that America has been a party to this. It's literally funded this war for the past 2 years with money and with weapons. So, I mean, people talk about Israel could have stopped this a year ago. So could America have stopped it a year ago.
Yeah, the Biden peace plan, or the ceasefire plan over a year ago, isn't that different to what we've been looking at. The fundamental difference is that Trump has brought enormous pressure on Israel to accept this plan, and we assume pretty much against Netanyahu's wishes. So, I think you're right in one sense. But I think, conversely, Trump has given him a huge amount of leeway. So when the moment came for him to say enough is enough, there's no way Netanyahu could wriggle out of that. And he knows that Trump is, although he's been able to manipulate to a certain extent Donald Trump, particularly over Iran, time was up. And I think that was very, very clear to him. And I think also in Stephen Witkoff, who's been criticised and ridiculed for his incompetency, allegedly, at least in dealing with the Russians and Ukrainians. But with Israel, he's been a lot more effective, because he said to the Israelis, I'm not taking this BS from you anymore. I know exactly what you're trying to do here. It's been much harder for the Israelis to pull the wool over his eyes. And that combination of Witkoff and Kushner as well, who does have a very intimate understanding of the intricacies of this conflict, because he looked at it very closely, and a president who's just called time on Israel, that has been, I think, in the end, a combination that Israel's just not been able to, Netanyahu in particular, has not been able to withstand, and he's had to sign up to this deal.
Dom, there's been a bit of a domestic spat in the UK about just how involved Britain has been in this peace plan. Did you see this?
Yeah, so on Trevor Phillips, Bridget Phillipson this morning said that Britain played a key role in this deal, something, she's an education secretary, so she went a bit out of her lane, and I think made something that has exposed the Starmer government to condemnation from everybody, from like Huckabee, the US ambassador here, to also Israeli officials who, for no reasons, are very angry with the Starmer government for recognising the state of Palestine. You just wonder why she didn't just say, we had a part in it, but we are, hugely grateful to Donald Trump, as we're going to hear all these leaders tomorrow saying in Sharm, for leading us to this moment where we are. So I think spoke out of turn, and has certainly had a bit of a pasting as a result of it.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where it's almost better just to let someone else say that Britain had a good role or a close role. You don't need to say it yourself. And certainly Mike Huckabee, who is the US ambassador to Israel, reposted it and said, I assure you, she's delusional. She can thank Donald Trump anytime just to set the record straight. So good news that Mike Huckabee is watching Sky News. Less good news for the British government. What I can tell you on that, interestingly, Dom, is that actually the UK has played a relatively central role behind the scenes, because Jonathan Powell, who's the National Security Advisor, we mentioned him earlier, was in Sharm el Sheikh last week. And I'm told, so he was at the talks. I'm told that Steve Witkoff respects him a lot. The two met in London at the state visit. They've met before, but they met there. And Jonathan Powell's role in past conflicts and conflict resolution, particularly in Northern Ireland, is something that Steve Witkoff and the Trump administration values. So there is a role that Britain is playing behind the scenes, but it's clearly not something that the Americans think that the Brits should be shouting about right now.
What is fascinating is that for 2 years we've seen nothing really move diplomatically. We've seen a very cautious, timid Biden administration, worried about getting things wrong, and suddenly everything has shifted. And now we're going to see this gathering of leaders and diplomats, as you say, some of the great brains in diplomacy at the moment, now really setting their minds to trying to solve this problem. And you wouldn't want to over-egg it, but there is a possibility that now that this leads to something greater. And I think for you in Sharm, it's going to be fascinating seeing, even though it's for quite a short period of time, how that comes together. Have you any idea how much access you'll have to this summit? How close you'll be able to observe them in action?
Absolutely no idea. I mean, I haven't actually been down. The Lamborghini Convention Center is just down the road. I have, for those of you watching on the vodcast, you can see I've got our passes here, so we're all set with them. But in terms of access, I have just no idea. And our live view, which is the bit of kit that we use to broadcast live with, has just been taken by the Egyptian customs authorities. So that's not a very good omen. But let's see. Let's see how we get on.
Without being overly critical of the Egyptians, I have been to smaller summits that have not been run brilliantly. So good luck.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. So, Dom, just before we go, I mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize earlier. And for those people who've been living under a rock since our last episode, he didn't win this year, which was no surprise. I was 99% sure he wouldn't win, not because I don't think he deserves it. I'm not going to pass judgment on that, but because the nominations had to be in by January, only a few days after he took office. So he didn't win this time, but he could well win next year.
Yeah, he didn't win. The prize was given instead to the Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado for her work fighting for democracy. When asked why the president didn't win it, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee chair said that they based their decisions on courage and integrity, which is fairly pointed. We saw a bad loser performance for the ages from the White House, didn't we, with Stephen Chung, Trump's comms director, saying that the Nobel Committee proved that they placed politics over peace. Trump hates being a loser, but seems happy to be a bad loser. I mean, I think people watching this would assume and conclude what you have as well, that, you know, while he continues to fail to put enough pressure on Putin to end the war in Ukraine, but also while he seems to be stoking division and conflict on the streets of multiple cities at home, he was never going to win the prize, not this year at least.
Dom, all I would say is that if he stays the course in Gaza, and let's hope that this ceasefire holds and he manages to do something that no American president has ever done in the Middle East before, if that all holds, plus he manages to at least find some sort of truce in Ukraine with Russia, and maybe he can find the sort of diplomacy that he appears to be using overseas and apply it domestically, where all hell seems to be breaking loose across the United States, then maybe he could be a very good contender at this time next year. So stay tuned.
Very much so. And Emily Thornberry, the Labour sort of foreign affairs veteran, said that if that happens, she'll be wearing a MAGA hat and she won't be the only one.
Very good. Well, look, a busy, busy day ahead for you, for me, for all of the Sky News teams dotted around the West Bank, Gaza, our local teams who are still operating in Gaza, our local Palestinian colleagues who've done such an extraordinary job over the course of the past 2 years in unbearable circumstances. They're still there. They'll be out and about tomorrow, as will you in Israel, teams in the West Bank, and we'll be down here in Sharm, and we will bring you all the coverage through the day. So stay tuned, but thanks for listening, and we will be back for another episode tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.